do appreciate that you joined us today. Again, I believe this is a fairly important topic, and we appreciate that you're interested in learning about sharing your flight data with others in terms of trying to make safer skies for our industry. Safety is a huge element for Helicopter Association International, and so we're grateful for our panelists today joining us to talk about it. Speaking of panelists, let's find out who we're talking with today. We have Chris Martino, who is the Senior Director of Operations and International Affairs here at HAI. We have Terry Van Bennekom, who is the Director of Technology of Truth Data Insights. He has more than 10 years of experience working on and managing FDM and FOQA and other aviation products all over the world, from major airlines to helicopter operations. He joined Truth Data shortly after its inception in 2016. We have Jeff Curran, who is the Director of Safety and Research for Truth Data, where he advocates for wider industry flight and monitoring adoption and promotes operational safety research with FDM tools. He's worked in support of flight safety for more than 10 years and has gained experience across multiple domains, from researching human performance to quantifying safety performance and managing FDM programs. We have David Diem, who is a rotary wing captain and a FOQA participant at Pfizer. Joe Kennedy, helicopter captain, FOQA participant at Johnson & Johnson. And Gary Melia, who is the helicopter captain and FOQA participant for Mass Mutual Financial Group. If this is your first time joining us, our webinars are interactive. We do encourage you to ask questions. This is a great opportunity to find out from the subject matter experts everything that you might want to know. The presentation should cover a lot, but if you have anything that you want to discuss, please use the question module at the bottom or the side of your screen. We do try to pay some attention to the chat function, but the question module gets 100% of our attention, and we will do our best to answer as many of the questions as we possibly can at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded. It is being live streamed on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. We will make the recording available to participants within about 24 hours. It usually takes a little bit of time to get things rendered and get things posted. Feel free to share it with anybody you think might want to watch it. This webinar will also be posted on our YouTube channel and on our website. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Martino, our Senior Director of Operations and International Affairs.
Thanks, Dan, and hello, everyone. I am Chris Martino, the Senior Director of Operations here at HAI, and I want to thank you for attending this afternoon's HAI at Work webinar. I agree with Dan. We have a great topic for you today, and I really believe it's a topic that should be getting more attention across our industry. Today, we'll be discussing data collection, data sharing, and the benefits that those can bring to your operations, both in terms of safety and savings. We've heard a lot about flight data monitoring, or FDM as it's known, but there's so much in the industry, unfortunately, that doesn't participate in this program. And that is unfortunate, because it means that there's a whole lot of benefits that are being missed out on, and things that are being left on the table. So for today's panel, we are very fortunate to have a group of industry experts who are leading the way within their own organizations to improve safety and efficiency. And they're basically doing it, and it's a fundamental thing that they're doing it. They're doing it through collection and the study of their flight data. So in addition to learning about how they're capturing and leveraging their individual data, you'll more importantly learn today how they benefit through the sharing of that data. So it's essentially an enhancement of safety through collaboration. It's a very simple concept, but it's a concept that can have such an immense impact to our industry. For the past several years, HAI has been a leading partner with the FAA and several major educational institutions in the development of a vertical aviation SIAS program. A SIAS is the term for Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing. For those of you who are familiar with the SIAS, you probably know that it's a data sharing program that's more common across the fixed wing industry. But our important takeaway from the fixed wing industry, I think, is that these programs have historically demonstrated very positive and measurable impacts to the safety and the economy of our operations. In short, they work. Now, that said, I'll be the first to admit that we in the vertical industry are probably a little bit behind. But that is understandable when you consider the variety and complexities of the operations that are conducted by rotorcraft. It's well beyond those that exist for the fixed wing community and other aviation sectors. Rotorcraft operations can't simply be fit into an existing SIS program that were essentially developed for fixed wing air operations. And that's why we've spent so much time and effort to develop an SIS program designed to support your operations. So that's what we have for you today. And again, I'm very excited about the topic, and I'm very appreciative of the panel that we have today. Our panelists, you'll find that they're all leaders. They're all leaders in the area of enhancing safety through data sharing. And today we're fortunate to have them here with us, willing to share their time, their stories, and their experiences. As always with our HAI at Work webinars, it's our goal to have you walk away from the webinar with a better understanding. And today we're hoping that you take away a better understanding of FDM and SIS programs. And again, most importantly, appreciation for the potential benefits that those can provide to you and the community as a whole. So again, thanks to our panelists, and thank you, our attendees, for being with us today. And now I'm getting ready to turn the program over to Jeff Curran, who's with us today from Truth Data. For those of you who don't know, Truth Data is an industry leader in rotorcraft FDM and a close working partner with HAI and the FAA in the development of a rotorcraft industry SIS program. So with that said, over to you, Jeff, and I'll see you in just a little while for the discussion part of the program. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, hi, welcome everybody. As Chris did a great introduction for us and kind of set us up for what I'm going to talk about. So I want to start at a high level and talk about this SIS program and safety data sharing and what we're going to do with it and what it looks like today and what it can become. And then Thierry and the rest of our operator group are going to discuss it at a very tactical level of how sharing works, how we can leverage flight data as a tool to start discussions. And, hopefully we can convince and persuade that, this is something that the rotorcraft industry really needs. So brief intro on Truth Data. This company was founded in 2015, and Chris briefed us a little bit, or briefed you on a little bit about the background. And it filled a niche, and it still fills a niche, where Pete Henriksen had found that there were a lot of FDM programs and a lot of FDM services out there, but none of them really fit the helicopter market well. And so after some development of software tools and events and algorithms and all these things, our purpose is to adapt FDM technologies to very specific rotorcraft operations and fit these programs to what helicopters do, because it's different than what an airline does. It's different than what a Part 91 business jet's doing. So there's a lot of room there, and then there's a lot of technology to navigate, to take flight data from an aircraft, and put it into practice as far as a useful safety bit of information. So I'm going to talk about this last bullet point on our list here, this HAI and rotorcraft SIS program a little bit. A SIS, as Chris mentioned, is this program that's existed for a long time on the 121 side of things. If you're an airline operator, you are well versed in what a SIS is. For the helicopter side, not so much. And we're working to take flight data, and flight data being, in kind of a brief definitions, the Fitbit data coming off your helicopter, right? It's the ups and downs, the lefts and rights, the how high, how fast bit of information. And Thierry's going to cover that a little bit more depth. But taking this data from our helicopter operators and pooling it together and for the benefit of learning. And I'm going to give you some snippets of what that looks like. But there's this premise that I want to talk about, that when we look at this accident rate, accident counts for a 30+ year history here, that what's gotten us here might not get us much further. And so this is an overarching theme for today. I want you to think about safety tools that we can leverage and technology that we can leverage and safety practices that we need to start adopting if we want to try to, beat this asymptote of accident and whole loss events. And can data sharing help with this? And I think so. So this chart that's up here is aggregate flight data from the helicopter industry that we have today. And you can start to group and categorize things by, approach events and general in-flight events and banks and ground operations or air taxi operations, whatever it may be. These things can all be parsed and cut out and analyzed in a lot of different ways. And can it help us? And I think so. It gives us this ability to benchmark and to ask some questions in comparison to a larger aggregate pool of what everyone else is doing with their aircraft and how they're managing their operations. And we can start benchmarking that. And we can ask, are we safe in comparison to what data we're measuring elsewhere? And how do we know that? Each operator is going to believe that they're a safe operator. No one is going to say that they're not. But what does that really mean in practice? And how can we know that? If you weren't safe, would your method of measuring safety and quantifying it or looking at your safety practices, would it tell you if you were not safe? And again, I think these data sharing and these data pooling and analysis features are tools that are going to help us do this. So if we look at, industry research in safety from other areas, high reliability or healthcare, we find that there's traits and practices that are really beneficial for these organizations. And this topic of data sharing and benchmarking and pooling our flight data and looking at that, and then the subsequent conversations that operators have are going to be effective tools that we can really leverage. A bit of SIAS information or data here. We can start looking at, again, like I said before, these things, snippets of approach events and vertical speed management type events, and then see how those play into higher level accident and incident, whole loss event data. And sometimes they match up and sometimes they don't. In this case, as our current data set in SIAS will say that we have a lot of approach events, but does that translate to whole loss and accident data? Not necessarily, given some of the data that we have here currently in front of us. So yeah, there's a whole set of research questions that we can go into, and we're just starting to skim the surface on this. So I'm not going to take up too much of the time here, but Rotorcraft SIAS is really a program to find the right rabbit holes and allow us to do some analysis that is going to take our safety practices further. So we could dive into things that are work is done versus work is imagined versus work is prescribed, some of these conceptual safety concepts. As we just looked at the slide ahead of us, that objective measurement of precursors for accidents, and how does that correlate from what we see in practice versus what we see in the whole loss accident records. And the other highlight from today, and the thing that on my soapbox we don't do enough of as safety professionals, is tell success stories. And the highlight of today is actually, we're going to talk about safety success. So this practice of using flight data as a conversation starter to discuss your practices and your operation and the risks you see, that's a safety success story. And again, we don't do enough of that. And lastly, this point I want to kind of leave off on is that fundamentally a safety program is a program for learning, and SIAS is going to be another tool that allows us to learn, target, and find these intervention points in our industry operations that we can leverage to be safer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thierry, and he's going to jump in and discuss flight data in detail. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me share my screen here. All right, thanks. And thanks for introducing me, and thanks to Dan and Chris for the great introduction earlier. So as Dan and Chris already said in the introduction, our esteemed customers from Pfizer, Mass Mutual, and Johnson & Johnson, Joe, Dave, and Gary being the focal managers for those companies, they formed a group together to share their experiences in FOQA and safety-related topics. And because there are customers, they asked if with the data that we have in our system, we could put something together to see if that yields new insights when we combine that data. So with Truth Data, as Jeff already told you, we support the Roadcraft Size project to share data in a bigger sense. But sharing between individual customers is something that we not normally have in our standard focus service package. But here the circumstances aligned that made this an interesting case, because these operations are so much alike, and Joe, Dave, and Gary have a very good working relationship and a trusting relationship. So we created a data sharing agreement between us four companies that describes what we can share and where the boundaries are. And in this presentation, I'll give you an example, as Jeff said, on the tactical level, what you can do when you combine this data of operators, and how with this group we can find potential safety concerns by looking at the differences between the operators and the common challenges. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. You've heard us say FDM and FOQA, so flight data monitoring and flight operation quality assurance. You maybe heard this in context with other terms as well. For all intents and purposes, this is the same thing. For whoever hasn't had the time to read up or dive into it, I'll just give a brief explanation. So CAP 739, if you want to read up on it, it's a very good document written by the CAA UK, defines flight data monitoring as the systematic, proactive use of digital flight data from routine operations to improve aviation safety within an intrinsically non-punitive and just safety culture. So it's recording flight data from your normal operations to improve safety. And that's quite a big leap. So you take data and you analyze it, and then magic happens, and then you're safe. Sounds like magic, but there's a process to it. And this is the process in just a nutshell. Your helicopter may already record some flight data on the FDR. That's what everybody thinks of. Downloading an FDR is a bit of a cumbersome process. So a lot of companies that have an FDM or a FOQA program, they outfit the aircraft with a quick access recorder or something else that records data that's a little bit easier to download. The AW139s that we'll talk about in a minute, they most of them have a fast box from Pratt & Whitney that sends the data off wirelessly through the mobile network. That's recommended, but there are all kinds of, it depends on the helicopter that you have, which one is the best and most convenient data source for FDM or FOQA. And there's a good chance your helicopter will already record flight data. If you have a Garmin or Avidyne glass cockpit, they already record data on the SD card. So that data can be either automatically uploaded through the mobile network or manually downloaded from the SD card or the memory card in the quick access recorder, and then uploaded to us through a Dropbox. And then that data is automatically processed in our system, and it looks for events, so exceedances. With our customers, we set, we customize a list of events and set it so it reflects their operation. So these are events, not just what's in the RFM. So those are some of the exceedances that can be triggered, but most of the ones are there to show us what unusual situations are. They're not to catch pilots to see if they did something they're not supposed to do. They're really to catch something that's unusual, and maybe an unusual situation might lead to finding out something that might be a concern. And we'll see this in the example that I'll give in a minute. So we can see the individual events. We usually, when there is a level 2 or 3 event, that's a slightly, an event that was slightly more unusual than normal operations, we'll write a little synopsis. Our clients can log into the web-based portal and see the flight and see what happens in a visualization with the instrument display visualization and 3D and a map and everything. And at the end of the month, we tally all those events up into a report, and that will show if there are any trends in the operation. And you take that information to see if there are any concerns, anything that we need to dive deeper and find out what might be unsafe and do something about it. So going back to our customers in our group, the operations that Joe, Gary, and Dave are part of, they really represent the best case for sharing flight data. They all fly the 139, they fly the same mission in the New York area to the same locations, those Manhattan heliports. So this is as apples to apples comparison as it gets. And most importantly, they trust each other. They trust each other with the concerns of the stuff they're facing every day as a pilot, and with the concerns of their colleagues. And what also helps is they have the data in the same system in it, so it's easy to pull out metrics and compare them. So when we start comparing data, what do we compare? Of course, we can start with comparing events or event rates. So which one of the operators has more events, or which events do we all have? Event rates, that's dividing the number of events by the number of flights. So you can compare if one operation who flies more compares to an operation who flies less. And then there are key point values. That's the name we give to measurements that are taken in every flight. So if the flight data is processed, we have about 300 measurements per flight. So we have not just the events that are kind of the edges of the operation, but also we have a metric for all the flights. So for example, the highest pitch angle below 5 feet AGL is measured for all the flights, see what the distribution is of all those high pitch angles, or the maximum rate of descent between 500 feet and 100 feet in the approach. I'll get to that in a minute. And finally, we can plot things on a map, see where the hotspots of these events are, and for instance, compare tracks, takeoff and landing profiles. So let's start with comparing event rates. here you see a chart, maybe a little much to take in, but on the left, you see a list of the events that are triggered. And you see on the x-axis, you see what the rates are, so how often they're triggered per 100 flights. Just to zoom into an example, and the example that we're working with here, you see the 3 different colors. Those are the 3 different operators. So you see there are quite some differences in how often these events are triggered. By the way, this particular event is a rate of descent high between 500 and 100 feet. That's the rate of descent in the approach, and if it exceeds 1100 feet per minute, then it'll pull up a little flag, and it triggers an event. So you see some differences between the operators. They all 3 have events, and I'll keep confidential which one of these operators, which one is which, but there are some differences. That doesn't mean one is safer than the other. This means there are differences we need to understand, and those differences generally have to do with the fact that they have differences in the operation. So when we dive a little deeper into this metric of rate of descent between 500 to 100 feet, we can take that as a measurement as well, that key point value that we call it. Here you see the distributions of all the flights and their rates of descent, that the highest rate of descent that was measured between 500 and 100 feet. So if you remember statistics from way back when, you kind of see that normal distribution, that bell curve in these 4 curves that you see here. On the y-axis, you see how often a value occurs if you divide it by the number of flights. And on the x-axis, you see the vertical speed. So rate of descent, it's downward vertical speed, that's negative. So the more you go to the left, the higher the rate of descent. And you see generally there are rates of descent here of about 900 feet per minute, 700 feet per minute. In that range, that's where most of the flights are. You also see what other 139 operators are doing. Those are other 139 operators that we have in the system. Mostly those are offshore operators, so they have a bit of a different approach profile. But you see the 3 operators here in green, blue, and orange. And you see there's a bit of a difference between the 3. So blue and especially green have slightly higher rates of descent than the orange operator. And everything to the left of the green line that I've plotted in here of 1100 feet per minute, that's going to be an event. So why are these operators different? I can't go into it that much and give specific details, but it has to do with the locations they fly into. And some of these locations, some airports have noise abatement procedures that require them to fly tight circuits and have a bit of a steeper approach profile. So these are just hitting 1100 feet per minute or slightly over momentarily as they have a bit of a steep point in the approach. So that's a difference between the operators. But if we really want to compare apples to apples, we look at where they all 3 fly into. So they all 3 fly into these Manhattan heliports, and when we overlay these distributions, then you see they're overlapping pretty much the same way. There's a little bit of a difference, but hardly there. And when we look at these metrics, we see that they all 3 have events in this when they approach Manhattan heliports. Not that often, not that concerning, but it's there. So we can have a look at what the shared challenge is here. So I plotted these on a map. You see on the left, you see the green and the yellow dots. Those represents the locations of those events. And you see the 3 heliports that they're flying into: Wall Street, West 30th, and East 34th Street. so you see most of the events are pretty close to East 34th Street in the East River. On the right, you see a plot of many of the flight tracks that are flown in around Manhattan and over the East River, so you get an idea of kind of what the tracks are when the heliports are approached. So why would you get these events relatively close to East 34th Street heliport? And this is where our quarterly meeting comes in. So Joe, Dave, Gary, and I come together every quarter virtually, because I'm in the Netherlands, and then discuss these items and see how that relates to the real world. And that's the most important part of this process, is finding out, okay, so we measure these events, but what does it actually mean? So it turns out part of the reason for these guys. East River, there's a lot of traffic through that corridor. There are float planes taking off. There are also a lot of structures, so you can't always fly. As I understand it, I'm not a pilot, and I'm definitely not a pilot flying into Manhattan heliports, but as I understand, you can't always fly the ideal approach path. There are a lot of factors in play. So in some cases, you might need a bit of a steeper approach profile, a bit more rate of descent, and that's a consequence of these factors. So context is everything. With the flight data, we just measure flight mechanics, but those are the consequences of the context that the pilots are facing every day. So the real concern is not the fact that rate of descent might be a little high. It's the other traffic and all the other stuff that's going on over there. So as I understand, there are already talks going on with other operators and float plane operators to maybe see if they can come up with something that can make sharing that airspace a little safer. But as you can imagine, it's these discussions to understand what is going on that are so valuable. So the million-dollar question now. So do you actually need a focus system and all that data analysis and data sharing to make the operation safer? Because, I mean, let's face it, anyone could have told you that flying through the East River corridor that's going to be a busy airspace. But the data is a starting point for this discussion, and you need those starting points and then try to understand what it means in the real world in the operation. So this data offers an objective starting point, something that you can measure. So you're not focusing on an incident or some story, but you have something tangible to start with. And there's a lot more in this data to start with. And another thing that we can verify is that these operations are not that different from each other. They're operating independently, but they're still pretty much flying the same way when we're comparing apples to apples. So they're flying the same way. That means we can reasonably assume they're reasonably safe. And that's good to know. Finally, I want to leave you with some recommendations. If you're starting a FOCA program or start maybe even data sharing between other operators or sharing experiences, I want to start with get the basics right first. And with that, I mean, start with culture. This is an information program. So there needs to be trust between pilots in the organization that the organization will do the right thing with that information and use it to make the operation safer. Secondly, get the right recording hardware. Make sure we always recommend wireless systems if you can, if it's possible to fit that on your aircraft, because it gets you the information faster and allows you to respond quicker to anything that happens in the flight. And in your focus system, get your events set up so it reflects your operation. So tune it to your own operation. So you don't get 0 events, then you don't have any information to work with, and don't get tons of events that distract you from any real concerns. So if you start sharing data or even just experiences, share it in a group with similar challenges. Sounds obvious, but yeah, comparing this to a heli skiing operation would be a little bit of a stretch, but it doesn't have to. All I want to say is it doesn't have to be as perfect as this, where it's the same aircraft type and the same mission and the same the same area and locations they fly into. It can just be the same aircraft type. You have challenges flying that aircraft type. You can discuss that, or flying in that region, or flying a similar mission like offshore operators, or we're already discussing a lot of safety challenges with each other. But discussing those challenges is very useful. And then very important, the conclusion of the example I gave, it's all about understanding the operation. FOCA is not about catching pilots and seeing if they did something they're not supposed to do. It's about understanding what they're facing every day. So I want to leave you with this. Look for what pilots need to succeed. And finally, if you want more information, there's some good safety information on rotor.org, and some more information about us and rotorcraft SIAS on pegasus.aero. And Jeff is organizing, if you want to know more about FOCA or FDM, we're at Heli Expo, and Jeff is organizing a bunch of presentations on Tuesday, the 8th of March at 2:30 p.m. Called Safety Ignited, Know Your Flight Data, Know Your Risk. Very interesting. And I'll hand it over to Chris for discussions on the panel.
There we go. Okay. Thierry, thank you very much, both you and Jeff. Wonderful presentations. So at this point for the discussion, I would ask that Gary and David and Joe bring up your screens, if you would join us. And we do have a few questions, and I'll go ahead and start off here and just basically hit you with this first one, which I like this question. And I think it kind of fits in. I'm not going to ask you to, because we've already introduced you, but just, you know, the question is this that came across is, how did this group come together, deciding to share? So what I'd like to do is maybe start with Gary and just kind of give us a, you know, number one, you know, what your organization sees in the benefit of this, and then number two, your thoughts on why this is a good group. So over to you, Gary.
Okay, well, you know, I came from a previous vendor that wasn't as progressive as I was hoping. You know, I was trying to get our helicopter program up to speed with our jet program, and the jet programs, of course, are way more mature at this point compared to helicopter programs, and I wanted to get the same out of our helicopter program. So that's definitely what drew me to Truth Data, because of the RSIS push. You know, I wanted to create information for the greater collective, so that the greater, you know, the greater good is getting information they can work and manage with. Now, specifically, how did I end up talking to Dave and Joe? Fortunately, we have a pretty good Northeast Safety Roundtable. We had become acquainted, and yeah, we became comfortable with each other. I gave them advice, they gave me advice. I shared my SOP and my flow chart. They shared their experiences with Truth Data, and you know, it just evolved. And you know, my program is where I want it now. I want to get better internally. I want our pilots to get the benefit of the program, but you know, I don't want to work in a silo. I want to know that I am, you know, keeping up with the Joneses, that if, you know, if Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson or any other operator out there is doing it better, I want to mimic that, and this is a perfect vehicle for that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Joe?
Yeah, I'd like to say Hello, everybody, and HAI, thanks for having us, and Truth Data also. Dear in particular, thanks for putting this together and inviting the three of us, because I do think we have a unique partnership here between the three companies and us three VOCA managers. But with that, you know, I think we all basically have a similar story. We're all looking for a viable helicopter FOCA program during the same general time. Actually, I know I spoke with Gary probably close to 4 or 5 years ago about FOCA. I knew very little about it on the helicopter side, and he shared some things with me, but at that particular time, we weren't quite ready for a FOCA program on the rotorcraft side. But shortly thereafter, we basically were. So that's when I reached out to Dave's company, who is actually on the same airfield as us, operates the same aircraft, utilizes the same Northeast venues. And I realized they were in the early stages of their FOCA program working with Truth Data. We took a look at Truth Data. We liked what they had to offer. Both companies at that time recognized the benefits of sharing the data, and the two of us shortly partnered as a team. And like with Gary, he joined us a little bit later, but he was definitely a factor in us getting a FOCA program. But you know, in a nutshell, it's like much of aviation: communication, sharing information, benchmarking. I think the three of us realized the benefits of teaming up together to enhance our individual safety programs.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that.
Sure.
And David, over to you, sir.
Definitely mirror what Gary and Joe had to say. You know, we were a fixed wing heavy department, and they were into the FOCA for 10 years before the helicopters even started thinking about it. And there was always a push for it, but it was a matter of trying to find a vendor that would give us, you know, a suitable product that, you know, the people that were used to being in FOCA and the size, you know, would be happy to see. You know, I met Joe through a Trenton operators symposium that we have annually at our hangar, and I got the opportunity to know him for the past 3 years or so. I was brought into the FOCA program when we had a pilot retire, and he was the one who was involved with the initial working with theory and getting the program up and running. So I was a little late to the initial push for the program. And, you know, as a line helicopter pilot looking at the program, I was a little apprehensive at first, as most pilots would be. But the guy who retired said, he goes, what you need to realize is that this is your program, and you guys can make it what you need, and, you know, direct it in ways you want to get the most value out of it. And it was a real eye opener coming to this program, and I think it's a fantastic program so far.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So again, we got some questions flowing in here. I'll go ahead and hit this one. We have one question that came in, and I kind of suspect it's an HAI question to answer, but if anybody else wants to jump on it, that's fine. But the question is this: it says, it's not clear to me if the rotorcraft ASIAS program is part of the FAA-funded ASIAS program executed through MITA. Can you clarify the relationship? So I'll take a first stab at it, and then obviously I think Jeff and Thierry, I mean, anybody can provide some input on it as well. But I mean, they are separate, and the reason I say that is because the MITA program that is up and running and has been around forever, and is well known, is used heavily in the fixed wing industry, the 121 world, as you heard a little bit earlier. The issue that we have in the rotorcraft community, and the reason why HAI was very proactive in getting together with the FAA and the Pegasus group, for those that are familiar with Pegasus, is because helicopter operations are different. There are somewhere around 50 plus missions that are conducted by helicopters, and they're all different. An air medical operator, their concept of operations, their flight profiles are different, for example, than folks that are doing aerial firefighting, or folks that are lifting logs out of the Pacific Northwest woods. So how do you capture that with a program that can provide meaningful data? And that was the basic question that basically started the ASIAS. It initially started off as a grant program under the FAA. So we have been working very closely with them to create this rotorcraft ASIAS program in order to have analytics that would be of benefit to different helicopter operations. So the answer is yes, it's a little bit different, but what we can say is that the program in itself is coming to a conclusion. The grant is now closed out, and we're actually just working on finalizing the solution set so that we can actually put something out there which is going to be of benefit to the entire rotorcraft community that they'll be able to feed information into. So that's the basics of it. It's a little bit different, but it has to be because helicopter operations are a little bit different. So does anybody else want to add anything to that, or did I kill that one?
No, I think you covered it, Chris.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, I think this one is probably for Jeff and for Thierry. The next question is, what equipment is required? And I know that's a very simple question, but I mean, could you touch base from Truth Data as the one accepting the information? What is the difference, and what are the deltas with regard to the equipment that's out there?
Well, that's one of these answers that you can answer with "it depends." It mostly depends on what helicopter you have. So first of all, some helicopters don't have a digital data bus, and you can't record anything that's coming from the aircraft itself. In that case, a lot of operators get one of those Apereo cameras or other standalone devices that record that are just have internal sensors and record pitch and roll and heading and GPS, and that's about it. And I mean, if it's an affordable way to record flight data, you get reasonably good information about where your aircraft has been and what it's been up to. Ideally, you would have more information like torque and airspeeds and all that. But if that's all that's available in the helicopter, that's a place to start. I would recommend doing that instead of having nothing. But if your helicopter has a digital bus, no FDR bus, maybe no ARINC 717 bus, then there are options for ARINC 429 type recorders like Quantifly on Bell. Skytrack has recorders in Latitude, as well as there's some other recorders out there that have multiple inputs from the ARINC 429 bus, and even analog inputs that you can use. But that becomes a little bit of a science project. If your helicopter does have like an ARINC 717 bus, maybe has a flight data recorder, you can download the FDR. As I said in my presentation, that's a bit of a cumbersome process because the FDR is crash protected, usually in a place that's hard to reach. So it might make sense to outfit it with one of the, and I recommend one of the wireless QARs, like the Pratt & Whitney Fast System that Gary and Dave have on their aircraft, and or I think Avionica has some wireless systems as well. So it's called the Mark III, I think. I don't remember what they call it these days, but you can put a little SIM card in there and it sends the data off wirelessly. And that wireless component is very useful because it makes sure that you're not, you don't have to go out to the aircraft every now and then to download the information, and then the information might be weeks old, and you see something is in there that you might want to have known about. But that's a long answer. It really depends on the helicopter that you have, and we can talk you through it and see if there's something that's suitable to your aircraft.
Okay. A very specific follow-up question came with this one, and I'll just kind of abbreviate it. But there's an operator out there that uses the Spider X. Can that system be used for flight data monitoring?
So the spider track. So there's sometimes some confusion about flight tracking, satellite tracking systems, and flight data monitoring. So the data that comes off that is sent over the satellite network is just position data. Maybe some other parameters are in there, but the frequency is not enough for an FDM or FOCA program. Usually they send a ping every 2 minutes. Maybe you can get it down to 1 minute or twice per minute, but that's not enough to know what's going on for a FOCA program. I know SpiderTrax did make a device that records standalone as a standalone capability, so that records GPS and pitch and roll. But I have not seen the data from that unit yet.
Yeah, the question came in and said they also have, it has a built-in AHRS and tracks 24 events to monitor. So, and then the basic question was, is that adequate for that? Okay.
Yeah, so that would be a similar to an Imperio unit. Yeah, so that would be, yeah, if you have nothing else, at least you have something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a question here for everybody, and we'll start with David. So the basic question is the reactions, but could each of you maybe touch base on how you address events when they pop up, and when you're addressing them, what kind of responses do you get from your pilots when you're addressing events with them? David?
Sure. Typically, if, let's say I get a high rate of descent that was maybe 1,200 feet per minute and it was in the yellow, what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll actually look where the event took place. And then if I, see that it's at an airport that has a fairly high noise abatement procedure, white planes, maybe HTO, where they're keeping you at 2,500, 3,000 feet till you're at the airport boundary, I won't even bother, because I know what the flight path was. Theory will send me an email and it'll actually show me graphically where the aircraft was, geolocated over Google Earth. So, if it's a one-off type event that is a little bit different, it's gotten to the point where I'll actually have pilots come to me and say, hey, we had a door light on takeoff, we did a quick stop, you may see something pop up on FOCA. So, and then I'll look for it, and then Theory will usually send me something, and then I'll just shoot them a quick note and say, hey, yeah, this was, what the guys had come to me with. So it's gone from I really haven't had events where I've had to go to somebody and pull out, hey, what was going on here? They're usually pretty self-explanatory, and they're usually operational considerations that make them, the occurrence. So I haven't had really any reaction. I was like, no, there's no way that could have happened, because what I've been finding out is that we all pretty much fly the same, which is nice to see.
It is. Gary, would you like to touch on that?
So my approach is that I've got a data point. I don't have a gig. I don't have a behavioral issue. I don't have somebody who's flying poorly. It's a data point that I want to validate. And when you start it that way, when you say, hey, I just want to talk about this flight you had the other day. There was an event that was triggered, and I want to make sure it's valid. I want to make sure it's valid data, because I'm trying to build a trend here. I'm trying to see if there's a trend. I'm not trying to see if I have a bad pilot or someone who doesn't like to follow our SOP. My goal is that we want to be better, more efficient, more standardized, and that will make us safer. So every bit of data that I get that is out of the norm helps me attain those goals. And I get no pushback. And I will admit, and not that I'll admit, I'll say that without a doubt, if you don't have the right culture, it's not going to work. You have to have, the just culture, the non-punitive culture. Your pilots have to know that the goal is to get better, not to find problems. The goal is to adjust technique. The goal is to create awareness. It's to spark discussion. It's to optimize. And once they realize that, then discussions aren't going to be a problem. But one thing to be cognizant of, especially any small operators that are listening, if somebody wants to find out who did what, it's not hard. You got to be careful with having discussions in open places. You got to be careful with when you talk to maintenance, like when you involve maintenance, kind of lets it out of the bag sometimes. So not only do your pilots have to understand the program, your maintenance team has to understand the program too, because it's a learning program. It's a program to get better, not to nitpick.
That's a great answer. Joe, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. Gary and Dave, I think, said it very well, but I'm going to take it from a broader picture or question, which you might be referring to, what we call a gatekeeper contact in regards to an identified event. One of the good things about, we have one helicopter and we have four crew members. So there's a good chance if we have an event, I'm one of the crew members on board, and I already know what happened and the why. But to date, I haven't personally had to make a gatekeeper contact with a crew member. However, our ops manual has clear guidelines on how it will be conducted, and it'll be conducted in a confidential and discreet manner. It'll be as minimally intrusive as possible. Quite frankly, probably it'll be a simple phone call at a convenient time to the crew member. Certainly not an interrogative approach, but a more of a discussion. And like Gary said, it's not about who did something, it's about why. And the why is to make it better. And we're very fortunate, I believe, in all three of our companies have a great culture where we can do this. And I can also share with you, our fixed wing gatekeeper, Kyle, who he and I are in constant contact. Through the years, he has had some gatekeeper contacts, and he shared with me that they always went like a conversation should go, open, honest, transparent. The crew member was not afraid to say, what he or she remembers, and like Gary says, to build on it and to make it a safer program.
I appreciate it. That's very insightful. We have time for one more question. This went really quick today, and it's for all of you. And the question is this: are you sharing data with the OEM? And if so, what type of support are you getting, or do you expect to get from OEMs as a result of the data that you're sharing with them? And I'll start back with you, Gary.
Well, I guess the short answer is no, but there are times when, if there's a maintenance event, something that requires investigation, this is really good information to be able to give them to back up flight data recorder information. So we don't share routinely, but when it helps troubleshooting and creating next steps after, an exceedance, it's very convenient. And, this is not meant to be a real-time reactive find stuff and respond to it. There is typically a data lag, but if you get the right equipment, it can be very convenient to go right to the data and back up what you're getting off the flight data recorder and creating a better picture for the manufacturer so that it can create your response to that event.
Okay, perfect. Joe?
Yeah, we haven't actually had to do it either, but as we know, with collecting this data, should we have to do it, we can back it up with the information like Gary said.
Perfect. Okay. And David?
We're the same, only data that will be useful in the maintenance issue. That's pretty much it.
Okay, perfect. Gentlemen, I can't believe how rapidly that went, but a great conversation, great presentations by Thierry and Jeff. And with that, I will turn the screen back over to Dan. And again, thanks everybody for being with us today. The screen is yours, Dan. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I do appreciate it. And of course, I need to express my appreciation to Terry, to Gary, to Joe, to Jeff, and to David in the order they are on my screen. Can't tell you how much we appreciate that you took the time this afternoon to come on and share your knowledge about sharing knowledge. It obviously makes a huge difference to our industry. And I'm grateful that you guys were able to take the time to join us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan.
I will go ahead and wrap things up here. Just a second. Let's see. I need to bring my screen up here. It all of a sudden wants to fight with me. So, of course, technology is our friend, right? Let's see here. There we go. Okay, coming up soon, our next webinar, save the date. Next week, we have the Honorable Robert Sumwalt. He retired late last fall from the NTSB, where he served as the chairman of the NTSB. And we're going to talk to him about some of his experiences while he served on the board, and about the most wanted list, how it came to be, some of the accident investigations. We're going to kind of cover a broad series of subjects. He's now an instructor at Embry-Riddle, one of the Embry-Riddle campuses, and so we're talking to him about a little bit about that as well. Do encourage questions from the audience on that one, absolutely. On February 17th, we have a webinar on avoiding wire strikes. This is something that affects our industry way too often. And we have somebody who will be able to give a firsthand account. We have people who will be able to discuss flying in the wire environment. And we have people who will be talking about the technology that they can install on your aircraft to help. On February 24th, this will be the last webinar we have before Heli Expo, and we will be discussing Heli Expo with the chairs of our HAI working groups. We have, I think, 13 or 14 working groups that study specific topics as directed by the board of directors. And this is, these guys are subject matter experts in a variety of fields. And so finding out what they've got planned for Heli Expo, the meetings that they're going to hold, where non-members are invited. If you want to join one of the working groups, you'll be able to do that too. There's going to be a lot of information. It's going to be fairly fast that day because we have, I think, 10 or 15 of them who are scheduled to attend, and we only have usually a 60-minute window. So please join us for that. The week before Heli Expo and the week of Heli Expo, we will not have webinars. So we hope that you'll be able to come to Heli Expo and see the helicopters live there. We will be sending around a survey very shortly. We do appreciate if you take just a few minutes to tell us what you thought about the webinar today. If you have suggestions for other webinars, we're always looking for good ideas. And it doesn't take too long. If you do have information for HAI in general, we always appreciate that information too. Please consider taking a few minutes to drop Jim Viola a note at president@rotor.org. He likes to hear from people. He likes to get a new perspective. He likes to know what you think we could be doing better, what we're already doing okay. If there's something that you don't think we're addressing at all, please let us know. Jim does see each email that comes in, and he does assign those to our staff for tasking. That said, that wraps us up for this week. We appreciate our guests today. We appreciate that you took the time out of your schedule to join us. Until next week, we ask that you be safe and that you fly safe, and we'll see you again very, very soon.